Julian's text vibrated against my martini. "Where are you?" "I cannot find the spare passport." I did not reply. I just sent a photo of my tanned legs against the Cayman turquoise. 3 seconds later, his typing icon vanished. He thinks he is celebrating with his intern, but he just walked into a financial time bomb I set 5 years ago. My lawyer smiled. "It is time to show our hand." My name is Doris McAllister, and for the last 15 years, I have been the invisible spine of a body that everyone else believes is held up by magic. On paper, I am the Chief Operating Officer of Origin Dynamics. In reality, I am the janitor, the architect, the bank, and the scapegoat. The world does not look at me. They look at my husband, Julian Thorne. At 45, Julian is the golden boy of the biotech world. A man the business magazines call the Silicon Valley genius and the visionary of the decade. He stands on stages illuminated by blue spotlights, wearing Japanese denim and Italian blazers, talking about extending human longevity and hacking the aging process. He speaks in sound bites that make investors weep with joy and open their checkbooks. He is charismatic, handsome in that carefully curated, silver fox way, and entirely hollow. I am 42 years old, 3 years his junior. Yet to hear him tell it, I might as well be a relic from the Victorian era. I do not have his gleaming veneer. I have worry lines etched around my eyes from reading patent filings until 3 in the morning. I have gray hairs hidden under professional dye jobs, because I actually run the company while he plays the role of the mascot. I am the one who knows that our proprietary cellular regeneration serum is still unstable at room temperature. Julian just knows that the bottle looks good on Instagram. We live in a sprawling estate in Connecticut, a place that real estate agents would call a masterpiece and a psychologist would call a cry for help. It is 6,000 square feet of glass, steel, and polished concrete. It is a house designed to be photographed, not lived in. The air conditioning is always set to a temperature that chills the skin, preserving the furniture like artifacts in a museum. We have a living room with a white sofa that costs more than most people's cars. A sofa I have never seen anyone sit on. The silence in this house is heavy. It presses against your eardrums. It is the silence of a marriage that died years ago. Even though neither of us has signed the death certificate, I started noticing the cracks in the porcelain veneer of our life about 6 months ago. They were small at first, the kind of things a busy woman can easily dismiss if she wants to stay blind. There was a scent on his bespoke suit jacket that did not belong to me. It was not the subtle floral notes I wear. It was something sugary and aggressive, like vanilla and desperation. Then came the late-night meetings. Julian had always worked late, but these were different. He would come home with his tie loosened and his cheeks flushed, not with the exhaustion of work, but with the adrenaline of a man who thinks he is getting away with something. He stopped looking me in the eye. That was the most telling sign. When we sat across from each other at the 20-foot marble dining table, eating meals prepared by a private chef we rarely spoke to, Julian would stare at his phone or look just past my ear. When he did speak, it was with a tone of thinly veiled irritation, as if my very presence was a smudge on his perfect lens. One morning last week, the cruelty became verbal. We were preparing for the annual shareholder gala, the most important night of the Origin calendar. I was wearing a navy blue gown, elegant and understated, appropriate for a COO who manages billion-dollar logistics. Julian walked into the bedroom, buttoning his cuffs, and stopped. He looked me up and down, his lip curling slightly. "Is that what you are wearing?" he asked. "It is a St. John," I replied, smoothing the fabric. "It is professional." "It is frumpy, Doris," he said, turning back to the mirror to admire his own jawline. "You look like a librarian. Origin is about the future. It is about vitality. Sexy science. You look old. You look tired. You are dragging down the brand aesthetic." I felt the sting of it, hot and sharp, but I did not cry. I have not cried in front of Julian in a decade. Crying is a waste of hydration. I look like the person who ensures the FDA compliance forms are filed on time. Julian, someone has to look like an adult while you play Peter Pan. He laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. That is your problem. You have no imagination. You have no spark anymore. You are just numbers on a spreadsheet. Doris, and numbers are boring. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that without my boring numbers, his Ferrari would be repossessed and his visionary empire would be exposed for the house of cards it truly was. But I bit my tongue. I swallowed the rage because I had a reason to keep the peace. Her name is Emily. My daughter is 19 years old, currently a sophomore at a liberal arts college on the West Coast. She is the only thing in this world that I love unconditionally. She is brilliant, kind, and thankfully, 3,000 miles away from the toxicity of her father. Julian treats Emily like a prop. When she was accepted into university, he posted a photo of himself holding her acceptance letter, captioning it with a paragraph about his own parenting philosophy. He didn't even tag her. I endure the cold house and the insults because I need to protect her future. Origen's stock price pays her tuition. It pays for her apartment. It ensures that she will start her life with a safety net that I never had. If I leave Julian now, if I blow up this marriage, the scandal could tank the IPO we are planning for next quarter. The investors bet on the power couple, the genius and the operator. If we split, the confidence shatters. So I stayed. I play the part of the supportive wife. I smile at the fundraisers. I nod when he interrupts me in meetings. I maintain the lie because the lie pays the bills. But the atmosphere in the Connecticut house has shifted from cold to freezing. Julian has become emboldened by my silence. He mistakes my patience for weakness. He thinks that because I am quiet, I am stupid. He forgets that I am the one who built the labyrinth he walks through. Yesterday evening, the final timber of our bridge burned down. Julian came home early, which was an anomaly in itself. He poured himself a glass of aged whiskey, not offering me one, and leaned against the granite kitchen island. I was reviewing the quarterly budget on my laptop, trying to find space to cut costs so he could have the marketing budget he demanded. "We need to make some changes in the executive office," he announced, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I didn't look up from the screen. "We already cut the travel budget. Julian, there is nothing left to trim unless you want to fly commercial." "Not that," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "I mean personnel. I need a new personal assistant. Mrs. Gable is too slow. She is inefficient." Mrs. Gable had been with the company for 20 years. She was efficient, loyal, and knew where the bodies were buried. "Mrs. Gable is an institution. Julian, she organizes your entire life. She knows your schedule better than you do." "She is a relic," he snapped. "Like this house. Like—" He stopped himself. But the implication hung in the air. "Like you. I need fresh energy. Someone who understands the digital landscape. Someone who can keep up with me. I have already interviewed a few candidates." I finally looked up. His eyes were shining with a manic sort of glint. It was the look he got when he was about to buy a car he couldn't afford or make a promise he couldn't keep. "You interviewed candidates without HR. I am the CEO. Doris, I do not need HR to tell me who can hold my iPad." He took a sip of his drink, a smug smile playing on his lips. "I found someone perfect. She starts on Monday. She is going to bring a whole new perspective to the inner circle, a breath of fresh air. You will see. It is exactly what we need to shake off this dust." My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. I knew that phrase. Fresh air in Julian's vocabulary meant trouble. It meant chaos wrapped in a pretty package. "What is her name?" I asked, keeping my voice level, stripped of all emotion. "Sienna," he said, and the way the name rolled off his tongue, soft and reverent, told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't just a name, it was an obsession. "She is young, hungry, and she has vision. You should try to be nice to her. Doris, you could learn a thing or two about enthusiasm." I looked at my husband, the man I had built a life with, the man I had carried on my back for a decade and a half. I saw the gray hairs he tried to hide, the vanity that drove him, and the absolute, terrifying emptiness of his soul. He was bringing his mistress into my company. He was bringing her into my world, parading her in front of me under the guise of professional assistance. He thought I was a piece of furniture he could rearrange at will. He thought I was old and lifeless. He thought I would just sit there and take it, because I had always sat there and taken it. "I am sure she will be very capable," I said, closing my laptop with a soft click. "Oh, she will be," Julian said, draining his glass. "She is going to change everything." He was right. Of course, he just didn't know how right he was. He thought he was introducing a new plaything into his kingdom. He didn't realize he was lighting the fuse on the dynamite I had been sitting on for years. I watched him walk out of the kitchen, whistling a tune, confident in his power, confident in his brilliance. I picked up my phone and checked the time. It was 9 o'clock at night. I sent a text to my daughter, "Love you. Sweetie, study hard." Then I opened the secure banking app on my phone and checked the balance of a separate offshore account that Julian knew nothing about. It was my war chest. If Julian wanted a breath of fresh air, I would give him a hurricane. But for now, I would wait. I would meet this Sienna. I would smile. I would be the frumpy, boring, invisible wife he despised. I would let him think he had won, right up until the moment I took everything he thought he owned. The picture of our marriage was perfect, framed in gold and hanging on the wall for the world to admire. But behind the canvas, the rot was spreading, and soon, the whole thing would come crashing down. Monday arrived with the subtlety of a car crash. I was in the executive suite by 7 in the morning, reviewing the supply chain logistics for our Asian markets, when the elevator doors chimed. Julian stepped out, looking more vibrant than he had in years. He was wearing a new suit, a shade of electric blue that screamed for attention, and trailing behind him was the breath of fresh air he had promised. Her name was Sienna. She was 24 years old, though her skin had the polished, poreless look of someone who lived entirely through a filter. She was not dressed for a biotech firm. She was dressed for a brunch in West Hollywood that might turn into a club appearance. Her skirt was short enough to be a liability, and her heels were higher than the safety railing on the terrace. She held a matcha latte in one hand and her phone in the other, thumbs scrolling incessantly. She did not look like an executive assistant. She looked like an influencer who had gotten lost on the way to Coachella. "Doris," Julian boomed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Meet Sienna. She's going to be shadowing me, helping with the optics of the brand." Sienna looked up, her eyes scanning me with a mixture of boredom and pity. It was the look of the young reserve for the invisible middle-aged. "Hi," she said, popping the word like a bubblegum bubble. "Julian says you run the boring stuff. That is so cool. I am terrible at math." "It is operations." "Sienna," I said, my voice flat. "It is the reason your paycheck will clear." Julian laughed, clapping a hand on her shoulder, his fingers lingering a second too long on the bare skin exposed by her sleeveless top. "See, I told you she was serious. Doris is in the engine room. We are the hood ornament. Sienna, come on, let me show you the corner office." For the next 2 weeks, I watched my workplace turn into a grotesque parody of a high school romance. Sienna did no work. I checked the server logs. She did not even have an email account set up for the first 3 days. Her primary function seemed to be laughing at Julian's jokes and taking selfies in the lobby with the company logo. Julian, meanwhile, stopped pretending to work altogether. Every day at noon, he would stroll past my office, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "Sienna and I are heading to Le Bernardin for a strategy lunch," he would announce. "We need to discuss the social media pivot." They would leave for 3 hours. I would sit at my desk, eating a salad from a plastic container, fielding calls from investors who were worried about our burn rate. I was the one putting out fires. I was the one calming down the head of research who threatened to quit because his budget had been slashed again. And while I worked, Julian was ordering tasting menus and pouring vintage wine for a girl who thought a Bunsen burner was a curling iron. But the humiliation did not stop at the lunches. It began to seep into the culture of the office like black mold. I started noticing the silence. When I walked into the break room, conversations would die instantly. People I had hired, people I had mentored, would look down at their shoes or suddenly become fascinated by the coffee machine. I cornered our HR director, a woman named Linda who had always been a friend, in the hallway. "What is going on?" "Linda," I asked, "why is everyone looking at me like I have a terminal illness?" Linda looked uncomfortable. She shifted her weight and lowered her voice. "Doris, honestly, there is talk. Julian, well, he has been telling the department heads that you are struggling. He mentioned early onset exhaustion. He said you are having episodes and that we need to be gentle with you because you are transitioning into a reduced role. He called it a compassionate retirement strategy." The blood drained from my face. It was masterfully cruel. He was not just cheating on me, he was dismantling my professional credibility so that when he finally pushed me out, everyone would think it was an act of mercy. He was painting me as a senile, fragile woman who needed to be put out to pasture, while he stood tall as the benevolent husband caring for his sick wife. I felt a surge of nausea, but I forced a smile. "I see. Well, Linda, as you can see, I am perfectly lucid, and I'm not going anywhere." I walked away, my heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the floor. I needed to see him. I needed to look him in the eye and see if he had the courage to say it to my face. I marched toward the CEO's office. The walls of Julian's office were floor-to-ceiling glass, designed to symbolize transparency. It was a design choice I had argued against, but Julian loved the idea of being on display. Today, that transparency was his undoing. The blinds were partially drawn, but not enough. Through the gap in the slats, I saw them. They were not working. There were no papers on the desk, no laptops open. Julian was sitting on the edge of his mahogany desk, and Sienna was standing between his legs. Her hands were on his chest, and his hands were gripping her waist, pulling her closer. They were laughing, a conspiratorial, intimate sound that vibrated through the glass. Then, he leaned in and kissed her. It was not a quick peck. It was deep, hungry, and possessive. It was the kiss of a man who thought he owned the world and everything in it. I stood there, frozen. My hand hovered over the door handle. A younger, more foolish version of me might have burst in. I might have screamed. I might have thrown a vase or slapped him. I might have made a scene that would have confirmed every lie he had told the staff about my mental state. If I stormed in there screaming, I would just be the crazy wife. I would be the emotional burden. Instead, a cold calm washed over me. It was ice water in my veins. The jealousy that had been simmering in my gut evaporated, replaced instantly by a profound, razor-sharp contempt. I looked at him, this man I had washed socks for, this man I had lied for, this man whose reputation I had polished until my hands bled and I felt nothing but disgust. He was a cliché. He was in a walking midlife crisis. I took my hand off the door handle. I turned around and walked back to my office. My steps silent. I closed my door and locked it. I sat down at my computer and cracked my knuckles. Julian thought power came from a job title or a corner office. He forgot that power in the 21st century comes from access. And as the COO, I had administrative privileges that even he did not understand. I bypassed the standard user interface and opened the command terminal. I logged in as the root administrator, a ghost profile I had created 5 years ago for system maintenance. I typed in the password, a string of characters only I knew. The screen turned black with green text. I was in. I went straight for the financial records. Not the sanitized reports we showed the board, but the raw data, the transactional backend. I filtered the search for the last 3 months, specifically flagging expenditures labeled under marketing, client relations, and miscellaneous operations. The results scrolled down the screen, and the numbers were staggering. $50,000 wired to a boutique travel agency and classic consulting fees. I cross-referenced the agency. They specialized in luxury yacht charters in the Mediterranean. $12,000 for office equipment from a vendor called Lumina. I looked up the vendor ID. It was a high-end jewelry store in Soho. $85,000 transferred to a shell company in Delaware listed as a branding partner. I traced the shell company's registration. It was incorporated 3 weeks ago. The registered agent address matched an apartment complex in Brooklyn Sienna's apartment complex. He was not just buying her dinner. He arrived home at 8 in the evening. The house was quiet. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book I wasn't actually absorbing. He walked in, bringing the smell of cold air and that cloying vanilla perfume with him. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. "Doris," he said, not bothering to say hello. He walked over to the fireplace and stood with his back to it, adopting a pose of authoritative regret. "We need to talk." I marked my page and looked up. "About what, Julian?" "About us," he said. He sighed, a theatrical exhale that was supposed to convey how heavy his burden was. "This isn't working. It hasn't worked for a long time. You are unhappy. I am unhappy. We are living a lie." "I thought we were fine," I said, keeping my voice small. "We have the company. We have Emily." "That is just it," he said, stepping forward. "The company needs a dynamic leader, and you are tired. Doris, I can see it. You are dragging, and frankly, I have met someone who inspires me, someone who matches my energy." He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked proud. "You want a divorce?" I asked, letting my lower lip tremble. "I think it is best," he said, "and I have had my lawyers draw up a preliminary agreement, since the company is my vision, and I am the face of the brand. I will retain full control of Origen. You will step down, obviously. I am willing to offer you a lump sum, $200,000. I almost laughed. 200,000. That was less than he had stolen in the last month alone. It was an insult so profound it took my breath away. Our assets were worth millions. "But Julian," I whispered, forcing tears into my eyes. "What about my shares? What about the house?" "The house is mortgaged to the hilt to fund the expansion," he lied smoothly. "And the shares, well, if we go to court, Doris, I will have to bring up your health issues, the instability. The staff has noticed. It would get very ugly. Do you really want Emily to see her mother dragged through the mud as incompetent? Do you want to ruin her last years of college with a public battle?" He was threatening me. He was using our daughter, the only innocent thing in our lives, as a bargaining chip to force me into poverty. He was smiling now, a predatory, confident smile. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I was the weak, broken woman he had created in his mind. I let out a sob. I buried my face in my hands, shaking my shoulders as if I were falling apart. "Please, Julian," I cried, my voice muffled. "Don't hurt Emily. I will do whatever you want. Just don't hurt her." "I knew you would be reasonable," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He walked over and patted my head, like one would pet an obedient dog. "It is for the best. Doris, you will see. You need rest. I will have the papers ready for you to sign before I go on my trip next week." "Trip?" I sniffled, looking up at him with wide, wet eyes. "Just a business conference," he said quickly. "In Cabo, important networking. I need to clear my head before the transition." "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Julian." He walked away, heading upstairs to shower off the scent of his mistress. Confident that he had won, he had no idea that the woman crying on the sofa was not defeated. I was just getting started. He thought he was the player, but he was just the pawn, and he had just moved exactly where I needed him. The building housing Sterling and Associates was not a glass monolith like the Origen headquarters. It was a pre-war limestone fortress on the Upper East Side, a place that whispered old money and ruthless efficiency rather than shouting about innovation. There was no signage, just a bronze plaque next to a heavy oak door. This was where the real power in New York went when they wanted a problem dissected and disposed of. They did not want publicity. They wanted results. I walked in at 10 in the morning, carrying a Hermes Birkin bag that contained my entire leverage against Julian, the receptionist, a woman with hair the color of steel and eyes to match, nodded once and buzzed me through. I was not there to see a junior associate. I was there to see Reginald Sterling, the man Wall Street whispered about in hushed tones. They called him the Butcher, not because he was loud, but because when he was finished, there was nothing left of the opposition but bones. Reginald was 55, a man carved from granite and bespoke wool. He sat behind a desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a battleship. He did not offer me coffee or sympathy. He simply extended a hand, accepted the flash drive I had extracted from the company server, and plugged it into his air-gapped laptop. "Talk," he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. I sat down, keeping my back straight. "My husband, Julian Thorne, is the CEO of Origen. He is embezzling funds to support a mistress and intends to divorce me, leaving me with a fraction of our assets. He believes I am mentally unstable and incompetent. I need to destroy him. Reginald, I do not just want a settlement. I want him erased." Reginald watched the data scroll across his screen. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the ledgers I had downloaded. "Sloppy," he muttered. "He is using a simple pass-through entity for the embezzlement. A first-year law student could trace this." He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "You have the financial smoking gun, Mrs. McAllister, but in a divorce, he will argue contribution. He will argue he built the brand. He will drag this out for 3 years while he bleeds the company dry to pay his legal fees. We need something faster. We need a kill switch." "I have one," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out a yellowed document, preserved in a plastic sleeve. "Look at the original incorporation papers from 15 years ago. Look at the patent filings for the cellular regeneration sequence." Reginald took the document. He put on a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles and read in silence for 5 minutes. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock. Then, for the first time, a small, terrifying smile touched the corners of his mouth. "He does not own it," Reginald said softly. "The fool does not own the product. Julian loves the spotlight," I explained. "He loves the brand name, the logo, the marketing. When we incorporated, he insisted on owning the trademark for Origen. But my father was a patent attorney. He advised me to keep the intellectual property separate. I hold the patents for the core technology in a separate holding company, DM Innovations, which licenses the tech to Origen. The license is revocable at will if the licensee violates moral clauses or financial solvency." Reginald looked at me with genuine respect. "So, Origen is just a fancy wrapper. You own the candy inside, if you revoke the license. His company is selling water in expensive bottles." "Exactly," I said. "But he has forgotten. He thinks Origen is an asset. He has not read the fine print in a decade." "This is checkmate," Reginald said, closing the folder. "But we must execute this with surgical precision. If he catches wind that you are moving against the IP, he will file an emergency injunction to block you. We need him to respond. We need him physically and legally out of reach for at least 48 hours to lock down the courts." "He is going to Cabo," I said. "He told me it is a business conference. I checked his itinerary. It is a 5-day stay at the El Dorado Resort. Just him and Sienna. He leaves on Tuesday morning." Reginald nodded, his mind already constructing the trap. "Operation Cayman Beach," he said. "While he is sipping margaritas, we will file the license revocation and the asset freeze simultaneously. By the time he lands, he will be CEO of nothing. But we need to secure your liquid assets first. Once the lawsuit drops, all domestic accounts will be frozen by the court pending the divorce outcome. You need war funds that the U.S. courts cannot touch." I spent the next 3 days moving like a ghost. I did not go to the office. I told Julian I was sick. Playing into his narrative of my frailty, while he was at work, preparing for his upcoming trip, I was systematically stripping our life of value. I went to the safe deposit box at the bank, I took out my grandmother's emerald necklace, the diamond tennis bracelets Julian had bought me as apology gifts over the years, and the Patek Philippe watches he had forgotten he owned. I did not sell them at a pawn shop. I took them to a private dealer Reginald recommended, a man who operated out of a secure suite in the Diamond District. He asked no questions. He wired $250,000 to a trust account Reginald had set up in the Cook Islands. Next came the art. We had a small Basquiat print in the hallway that Julian despised. He called it Scribbles. I knew it was worth $80,000. I sold it to a collector in London, arranging for immediate pickup while Julian was at a board meeting that was actually a lunch date with Sienna. Every dollar I liquidated was a brick in the wall I was building between myself and poverty. I was not stealing. These were marital assets, and I was simply ensuring my half was secure before the lawyers started billing $600 an hour. Then came the evidence. I knew that electronic data could be wiped. I knew servers could crash accidentally. I bought 3 military-grade encrypted hard drives. On each one, I copied the entire contents of the Origen Black server, the emails between Julian and the travel agent, the invoices for Sienna's jewelry disguised as optical equipment, and the bank transfers to the shell company. I put one drive in the Cook Islands trust package. I gave the second to Reginald for safekeeping. The third, I taped under the drawer of my vanity table in the bedroom. A backup for the backup. By Monday night, the house felt different. It was no longer my home. It was a crime scene waiting to be discovered. Julian came home late, buzzing with the energy of a man about to escape. He had his suitcase packed a Louis Vuitton trunk that cost more than my first car. He came into the bedroom where I was sitting in bed, pretending to read. He held a stack of papers in his hand. "Doris," he said, his voice brisk and businesslike, "I need you to sign these before I go. It is just some housekeeping for the corporate restructuring. Since you are stepping back, we need to transfer your voting proxy to me for the next quarter. Standard procedure." I looked at the papers. It was a transfer of stock ownership, disguised as a temporary proxy. If I signed this, I would be giving him legal control of my shares. He was trying to rob me blind before he even got on the plane, but Reginald and I had anticipated this. "I do not understand these legal terms. Julian," I stammered, making my hands shake as I reached for my reading glasses. "Is this really necessary tonight? I am feeling very dizzy." "It is just a formality." "Doris," he snapped, thrusting a pen at me, "just sign at the bottom. Do not make this difficult. You trust me to run the company. Do you not? This just lets me make decisions while you rest." I looked at him. I saw the impatience in his eyes, the utter lack of respect. He really thought I was this stupid. "Okay," I whispered. "If it helps the company." I took the pen. I turned to the signature page. But I did not sign the version he had handed me. Earlier that afternoon, while he was in the shower, I had swapped the middle pages of the document in his briefcase with pages Reginald had drafted. They looked identical, same font, same headers, but the text in the clause section was different. Instead of an unconditional transfer of shares, the document I was about to sign stated that the proxy was valid only upon the physical presence of the signatory at the board meeting. Since I would not be at the meeting, the proxy would be void. Furthermore, buried in the fine print of the indemnity clause was a statement that acknowledged the signatory me retained full and irrevocable ownership of all intellectual property, superseding any previous agreements. Julian had not read it. He was too arrogant to check his own paperwork. He just wanted the signature. My hand trembled as I pressed the pen to the paper. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I signed my name, the ink flowing dark and permanent. "There," I said, handing the papers back to him. "Is that all?" "Perfect," Julian said, snatching the folder. He didn't even check the signature. He just tossed it into his bag, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "You did the right thing, Doris. Now, get some sleep. You look terrible." "Have a safe trip," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I hope you find what you are looking for in Cabo." "It is a seminar, Doris," he corrected me. adjusting his cuffs. Work, work, work. He turned off the light and left the room. I lay in the dark, listening to him hum as he finished packing. He was so happy. He was going to a paradise with his young lover, armed with the belief that he had stripped his wife of her power. I waited until I heard his breathing even out into the rhythm of sleep from the guest room down the hall. Then I sat up. I was not dizzy. I was not tired. My heart was beating with the steady, heavy rhythm of a war drum. I pulled out my phone and sent a secure message to Reginald. The bird is in the cage. He has the dummy papers. He leaves at 6 a.m. Reginald's reply came back 10 seconds later. The team is ready. We move the moment his wheels leave the tarmac. Get some rest. Mrs. McAllister. Tomorrow, we go to war. I did not sleep. I lay there and watched the moon track across the ceiling. I thought about the 15 years I had given this man. I thought about the dinners I had cooked, the lies I had told to protect his ego, the way I had made myself small so he could feel big. Tomorrow, the shrinking will stop. Tomorrow, Julian Thorne was going to learn that the woman he called old and lifeless was the only reason he was standing. And when I pulled the rug out, the fall would be absolute. I closed my eyes and visualized the turquoise water of the Cayman Islands. I had a plane to catch too. But unlike Julian, my trip was not a vacation. It was an execution. I checked my bank balance one last time. The offshore funds had cleared. $330,000. Safe and untouchable. It was enough to start the fire. The alarm clock on Julian's side of the bed blinked at 3 a.m. 3 hours until departure. 3 hours until the end of his world. I pulled the duvet up to my chin and finally, for the first time in months, I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the hunter who heard the trap snap shut. At 30,000 feet, the air is thin and the champagne is vintage. Julian sat in seat 1A, a flute of Dom Perignon in his hand, watching the clouds beneath him. Next to him, Sienna was taking a video for her Instagram story, panning the camera from the crystal glass to the endless blue horizon, captioning it, "Work hard, play harder." She giggled, a sound that grated on anyone over the age of 30, but which Julian found intoxicating. "To the future," Julian toasted, clinking his glass against hers, "and to leave the past in the dust." "Is she going to be okay?" Sienna asked, though her tone suggested she did not actually care. "Your wife. She seemed so confused when we left," Julian laughed, leaning back into the leather seat. "Doris. She is a relic, babe. She is like a fax machine in a world of cloud computing. Useful once, maybe, but now she is just taking up space. She signed the papers. She is out. We are free." At that exact moment, 3,000 miles away, I stepped out of a black SUV in front of the Origen headquarters. I was not confused. I was not a relic. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost $4,000, and I was flanked by Reginald Sterling and 4 of his junior associates, who moved with the synchronized aggression of a wolf pack. The security guard, a man named Mike, whose daughter's tuition I had quietly helped pay for 2 years ago, looked at me and then at the formidable wall of lawyers behind me. He did not ask for ID. He simply swiped his badge and held the turnstile open. "Good morning, Mrs. McAllister," Mike said, nodding respectfully. "Good morning, Mike," I replied, not breaking stride. "We are going to the boardroom. Do not let anyone else up without my direct authorization." While Julian was landing in Cabo San Lucas, feeling the warm tropical breeze hit his face, I was feeling the recycled air of the elevator shaft as we ascended to the 42nd floor. Julian was currently being escorted to a private limousine by a resort concierge who bowed too low. I was marching down the hallway toward the boardroom where the emergency meeting I had called was about to begin. I pushed open the double oak doors. The board of directors was already seated. There were 8 of them, men and women who controlled pension funds and venture capital firms. They looked annoyed. They had been summoned on short notice with a cryptic message about existential risk when they saw me. Their annoyance turned to confusion. They were expecting Julian. They were expecting the charismatic visionary. Instead, they got the wife. "Doris?" asked Marcus Thorne, the chairman. No relation to Julian, just a coincidence of naming that Julian loved to exploit. "Where is Julian?" We were told this was code red. "Julian is currently in Mexico," I said, placing my leather portfolio on the head of the table. "He believes he is attending a seminar. In reality, he is checking into the El Dorado Royal Suite with his 24-year-old mistress, using company funds to pay for the upgrade." A murmur went through the room. "That is a personal matter, Doris," Marcus said, frowning. "We are not here to discuss your marriage." "We are here to discuss theft," Reginald Sterling interjected from the doorway. His voice was like a heavy stone dropping into a still pond. "And we are here to discuss the fact that Origen Dynamics is currently operating illegally." I opened my portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper down the long mahogany table. It was a cease and desist order. "As of this morning," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I have revoked the licensing agreement between DM Innovations, my holding company, and Origen Dynamics. You are all aware, I assume, that while Julian owns the brand name, I own the patents for the cellular regeneration sequence. I own the formula. I own science." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of men realizing they had been betting on the wrong horse. "You can't do that," one of the investors stammered. "That would shut down production." "It already has," I said. "My lawyers served the manufacturing plant an hour ago. The machines are off. The inventory is frozen. Without my license, Origen is just a marketing firm with a very expensive lease." While the panic was setting in inside the boardroom, Julian was checking into the resort. The lobby was an open-air pavilion with a thatched roof and a view of the Sea of Cortez. A waiter brought them towels scented with lavender. "This is life, Julian," Sienna sighed, looking around at the opulence. "You really are the king." "And you are the queen," Julian said, wrapping his arm around her. "Whatever you want, babe, put it in the room. Spa treatments, shopping, private yacht tours. The company is having a record quarter. We deserve this." Back in Connecticut, I was projecting a spreadsheet onto the smart screen at the head of the table. It was the black ledger I had downloaded. "This," I said, pointing to the columns of red numbers, "is where your record quarter went. Julian has funneled $3 million of operating capital into shell companies in the last 6 months. He has categorized diamond jewelry as optical lenses. He has categorized luxury travel as market research. He has drained the liquidity of this firm to zero." The board members were reading the documents Reginald's team had distributed. Their faces were pale. They were not looking at a scandal. They were looking at prison time for negligence if they did not act. "He told us we were profitable," Marcus whispered, staring at the bank statements. "He showed us the audit." "He showed you a forged audit," I corrected him. "Julian is a fraud, and right now, he is spending the last of your money on a bottle of tequila in Cabo." I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. "You have 2 choices. Choice A. You keep Julian as CEO. I permanently revoke the patent license, sue the company for intellectual property theft, and release these financial documents to the SEC. Origen stock goes to zero by tomorrow morning, and you all spend the next 5 years in court." I paused, letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. "Choice B. You vote to remove Julian Thorne effective immediately for cause. You appoint me as interim CEO. I reinstated the license, we restructure the debt, and I use my personal capital to float the payroll until we can stabilize the bleeding. We survive." It wasn't even a debate. It was a survival instinct. "All in favor of removing Julian Thorne?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking slightly. 8 hands went up instantly. "All in favor of appointing Doris McAllister as interim CEO?" 8 hands went up again. "Done," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Fix this, Doris, please." "I will," I said. "First order of business, cut him off." At the resort, Julian was handing his heavy metal credit card, the black card tied to the corporate expense account, to the receptionist to cover the $5,000 deposit. "Certainly. Mr. Thorne," the receptionist said with a bright smile. She swiped the card. She frowned. She swiped it again. "Is there a problem?" Julian asked, tapping his fingers on the counter. "It says declined, sir," she said. "Authorized seizure." "That is ridiculous," Julian scoffed. "It is an unlimited limit. Try this one." He handed her his personal platinum card. She swiped it. "Declined. Card reported lost or stolen." "What?" Julian's face flushed. "That is impossible. I am the CEO. Try the debit card." While Julian was arguing with the receptionist, humiliated in front of a line of tourists, I was sitting in his office, my office now. I was on the phone with the bank's fraud department. "Yes," I said into the receiver. "This is Doris McAllister, interim CEO of Origen. I am confirming the freeze on all accounts associated with Julian Thorne pending a forensic audit. Yes, all of them, including the joint accounts. He is a flight risk. Thank you." I hung up the phone. I looked around the office. It smelled of him, that mixture of expensive cologne and arrogance. I picked up the framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of him shaking hands with a senator. I threw it into the trash can. I didn't stop there. I left the office at 2 p.m. and drove back to the mansion. The moving trucks were already there. A team I had hired privately. They were not moving furniture. They were moving my life. I walked through the house, pointing at things. Take the books. Take the piano. Take the paintings that belong to my family trust. I went into the master bedroom. I packed my clothes, my shoes, the things that made me human. I left his closet untouched. His rows of Italian suits, his collection of silk ties. His shoes, they all stayed. They were costumes for a play that had been canceled. When the trucks were loaded, the house echoed. It was a vast, hollow shell. I walked to the kitchen counter where Julian always left his spare keys. I took out a white envelope. Inside was a letter from the bank. I had stopped paying the mortgage 6 months ago, diverting the funds to the secret account instead. Julian, who never opened mail, didn't know. The foreclosure notice arrived yesterday. The house was no longer ours. It belonged to the bank. I placed the house keys on top of the foreclosure notice. Next to it, I placed his wedding ring, which I had retrieved from the jewelry box where he kept it when he went to the gym. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. The wind was cold, biting through my coat, but I didn't feel it. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. In Cabo, Julian was frantically calling the office. Pick up! Pick up!" he hissed, pacing the lobby while Sienna sat on a suitcase, looking bored and annoyed. Why is no one picking up? He didn't know that I had ordered the IT department to redirect all his calls to legal. He didn't know that his keycard to the building had already been deactivated. He didn't know that the seminar was over. I got into my car. I checked my phone. One new message from Reginald. The petition for divorce and the restraining order have been filed. The process servers are hiring a local courier in Cabo to deliver them to the hotel lobby. Estimated time of arrival 4 hours. I started the engine. The dashboard clock glowed soft blue. It was time for the final phase. Julian was stranded in a foreign country with no money, no job, and a woman who was with him only for the lifestyle he could no longer afford. He thought he was on vacation. He was actually in a cage match, and he was the only one who didn't know the rules. I drove toward the airport. My flight to the Cayman Islands left in 3 hours. I had a beach selfie to take. The third day of Julian's tropical getaway was designed to be the apex of his victory lap, but instead, it became the beginning of his suffocation. I was not there to witness it in person, but I have reconstructed the events with the precision of a forensic accountant, piecing together the timeline from credit card decline logs, server access attempts, and the pathetic, frantic voicemails he eventually left on my office line. By Wednesday evening, the humidity in Cabo San Lucas was heavy, the kind of thick, tropical air that usually promises a storm. Julian and Sienna were seated at the resort's premier seafood restaurant. A place where the tables are set directly on the sand and the menu does not list prices. They had just finished a meal that cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month. There were empty shells of spiny lobsters on their plates and a bottle of Cristal, 2/3 empty, chilling in a silver bucket beside them. Julian was feeling expansive. He was leaning back in his chair, telling Sienna about his plans to buy a vineyard in Napa Valley once the divorce was finalized. He was crafting a future using money he no longer possessed. Then the waiter arrived. He was a young man with a polite smile and a leather billfolder. He placed it on the table. Julian didn't even look at the total. He simply slid his Platinum Origen corporate card into the folder and waved the waiter away with a dismissive flick of his wrist. 10 minutes passed. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. The waiter returned, but the smile was gone. He held the card with the tips of his fingers, as if it were contaminated. "I apologize, Senor Thorne," the waiter said, his voice low enough to avoid embarrassing the other guests, but loud enough for Sienna to hear. "The card has been declined. The machine says, 'Pick up and hold.'" Julian laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "That is ridiculous. It is a black card. It has no limit. You must have a connection error. Run it again." "We tried 3 times, Senor," the waiter said, his patience thinning. "The bank has flagged it as stolen property. Do you have another form of payment?" Sienna looked up from her phone, her eyebrows narrowing. "Julian, what is going on?" "It is a glitch, babe," Julian said, snatching the card back. "Probably the fraud detection algorithm is being overzealous because we are in Mexico. I will call them." He reached for his wallet and pulled out his personal reserve card, the one linked to our joint account. He handed it to the waiter with a confident sneer. "Use this one, and add 20% gratuity for the hassle." The waiter walked away. Julian pulled out his phone to check his banking app, intending to yell at a customer service representative, but when he tapped the icon, the app didn't open. Instead, a red dialog box appeared, "User access suspended. Please contact your branch administrator." "What the hell?" Julian muttered, tapping the screen aggressively. The waiter returned in less than 2 minutes. He was accompanied by the restaurant manager this time. "This card is also declined. Senor, code 41. Lost or stolen." Sienna let out a huff of annoyance. "Julian, this is embarrassing. People are looking." "It is a system error," Julian hissed, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "The entire banking network must be down. Do you have cash?" "Sienna." "I have $20, she said, rolling her eyes. "You said you were paying for everything. My card got declined at the boutique this afternoon. Remember, I thought you fixed it." "I will fix it," Julian stammered. He looked at the manager. "Charge it to the room. I will sort this out with the concierge in the morning." The manager crossed his arms. "I am afraid we cannot do that. Mr. Thorne, the front desk just alerted us that your room deposit has been reversed by the issuing bank. We need a valid form of payment immediately, or we will have to involve the local authorities." The word authorities hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Julian Thorne, the Silicon Valley genius, the man who was going to live forever, was suddenly just a tourist who couldn't pay for his dinner. He had to leave his Rolex Submariner, a $12,000 watch, as collateral, just to leave the restaurant. He marched back to the suite, Sienna trailing behind him, complaining about how he was ruining the vibe. Julian ignored her. He needed to get online. He needed to assert control. He stormed into the room and flipped open his laptop. He tried to log into his corporate email to demand an explanation from the chief financial officer. Account disabled. Contact system administrator. He tried his personal Gmail. Password changed 2 hours ago. He tried to remote into the company server. Connection refused. IP address. Blacklisted. He was in a digital cage. Every door he tried to open was bolted shut. Panic began to claw at his throat. But his arrogance was a powerful drug. He refused to believe he had been outmaneuvered. He convinced himself it was a technical catastrophe, a hacking attempt on the company, or perhaps a massive incompetence by the IT department. He paced the room. sweating through his linen shirt. He needed cash. He needed a way out. Then he remembered the wall safe in our master bedroom in Connecticut. He kept an emergency stash there, $50,000 in cash, and a second passport he had obtained years ago for security reasons. He grabbed his phone. He needed someone on the inside. He needed me. He assumed I was at home, weeping into a pillow, devastated by his departure. He assumed I was still the obedient wife waiting for instructions. He didn't know that the house in Connecticut was empty, dark, and owned by the bank. He typed the message with trembling fingers. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. He commanded, "Where are you?" "The house systems are offline and I cannot access the accounts. Go to the safe in the bedroom, get the passport and the cash, FedEx them to me overnight, priority, answer me, 3,000 miles away." The sun was high and bright over the Caribbean Sea. I was sitting on a teak lounge chair on 7 Mile Beach in Grand Cayman. The sand was cool, like powdered sugar, between my toes. To my left sat Reginald Sterling, looking oddly relaxed in a linen shirt, though he still wore his dress shoes. We were not drinking champagne. We were drinking sparkling water with lime, keeping our heads clear for the victory lap. My phone buzzed on the glass table between us. It vibrated against the base of my glass, making the condensation shiver. I looked down. The name Julian flashed on the screen. Reginald glanced over, raising an eyebrow. "Is that him?" "It is," I said. Picking up the phone, I read the message aloud. "He wants his passport. He wants his cash. He thinks I am his errand girl." Reginald chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. "He does not know about the foreclosure yet, or the seizure order." "He is finding out right now," I said. "He is pulling on a thread, and the whole sweater is unraveling." I looked out at the ocean. The water was a stunning, impossible turquoise. It was the color of freedom. I thought about the woman I used to be, the woman who would have panicked at that text, who would have rushed to fix his problem, who would have apologized for his mistakes. That woman was dead. She had died the moment he touched Sienna in his office. "I am not going to type a reply," I said. "No," Reginald asked. "No, words are too easy. He needs a visual aid." I lifted my phone. I did not check my hair. I did not fix my lipstick. I did not angle the camera to hide the fine lines around my eyes. I wanted him to see me exactly as I was, 42 years old, unburdened and radiantly alive. I framed the shot in the background. The pristine white sand and the azure water stretched out to infinity. In the foreground, my legs, tanned and crossed at the ankles, and my hand holding the glass, and my face smiling. Not a polite, corporate smile, a feral, genuine smile. The smile of a woman who has just burned down the prison and walked out of the smoke without coughing. Click. I attached the photo to the chat thread. Underneath it, I typed a message that I had been composing in my head for 5 years. Even if I hadn't realized it, I am enjoying the special dividend from selling the patent rights this morning. The wire transfer just cleared. Have fun with the empty shell. Julian. By the way, the house keys are on the counter. The bank owns it now. I pressed send. I watched the screen. Delivered. Read. In the hotel room in Cabo. The phone fell from Julian's hand. It hit the marble floor with a crack, but the screen stayed on. He stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. He looked at the photo. He saw the beach. He saw the relaxed posture of a woman who had no cares in the world. And then he read the words, selling the patent rights. The blood drained from his face so fast it left him dizzy. He staggered back, hitting the edge of the dresser. He understood instantly. He knew the corporate structure better than anyone, or he thought he did. He knew that without the patents, Origen was nothing. It was a brand name on a bottle of tap water. If she had sold the rights, or transferred them, the company stock, his entire net worth, was effectively zero. He looked over at Sienna. She was lying on the bed, filing her nails, looking bored. "Did you fix it?" she asked, not looking up. "Can we go shopping tomorrow?" Julian looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the emptiness in her eyes. He saw the way she looked at him not with love, but with expectation. He realized with a jolt of nausea that she was an expense he could no longer afford. He was stuck in a foreign country. His credit cards were dead. His company was hollowed out. His house was gone. "Sienna," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We have a problem." "Ugh, what now?" she groaned. "Everything," he said, sinking onto the floor. His eyes fixed on the cracked screen of his phone where my smiling face mocked him. "She took everything." Back in Cayman. I put the phone down. I took a sip of my water. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. "He read it," I told Reginald. And now," I said, closing my eyes and listening to the sound of the waves. "We wait for the implosion. It should take about 24 hours for the news to hit Wall Street, but for Julian, the world just ended." I felt a profound sense of peace. It wasn't just revenge, it was a correction. The universe had been out of balance for a long time, tilted in favor of the loud and the selfish. Today, gravity had finally done its job. I took a deep breath of the salt air. It tasted like victory. The collapse of Julian Thorne did not happen in silence. It was loud, public, and streamed in high definition for the entire world to see. While I sat on my terrace in the Cayman Islands, sipping iced tea and watching the sun dance on the water, my husband was experiencing a dismantling of his life that was so thorough it was almost mathematical in its precision. I did not need to be there to know what happened. The internet, the 24-hour news cycle, and the court filings painted the picture with brutal clarity. It began at the checkout desk of the El Dorado Resort. It was 11 in the morning on Thursday. Julian approached the marble counter with the confidence of a man who is used to problems vanishing with a signature. He was wearing his linen suit, crumpled from a night of pacing, and his eyes were rimmed with red. Sienna stood a few feet behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses and tapping her foot. She had been complaining about the humidity for an hour. "I am checking out," Julian announced to the manager, "and I want to dispute several charges on the bill. The champagne was warm, and the room service was slow." The manager, a man named Ricardo, who had been briefed by his own corporate office regarding the payment issues, did not smile. He looked at Julian with the weary patience of someone dealing with an unruly child. "Certainly, Mr. Thorne," Ricardo said. "The total for your stay, including the damage to the suite door you kicked last night and the unpaid dinner, comes to $14,500. How would you like to settle this?" Julian pulled out his wallet. It was an involuntary reflex. He had already tried every card in it. But denial is a powerful narcotic. He slapped his platinum card on the counter. "Run it again. I called the bank. It should be cleared." He had not called the bank. He had screamed at an automated voice prompt for 20 minutes before smashing the receiver. Ricardo swiped the card. The machine beeped a harsh, flat note, declined. "Try this one," Julian said, his voice rising. He produced the corporate expense card. Declined. "This is a mistake," Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the marble. The sound echoed through the lobby, causing heads to turn. Tourists in floral shirts stopped to watch. "Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Origin Dynamics. I could buy this hotel and turn it into a parking lot." "Sir," Ricardo said, his voice hardening, "your cards are frozen. We have received a notification from the issuer regarding suspected fraud. Unless you can produce cash or a valid payment method, we cannot let you leave the premises. Security is already on standby." Julian looked around. 2 large men in uniforms were standing by the glass doors, arms crossed. The trap was physical now. He turned to Sienna. "Sienna, baby, you have to help me. Call your father. Call anyone. I will pay you back double as soon as we get to the States. I just need to get us out of here." Sienna lowered her sunglasses. She looked at Julian, really looked at him, for the first time. She did not see the powerful CEO anymore. She saw a desperate, sweating middle-aged man who was broke. The illusion had shattered. My dad, Sienna scoffed, her voice loud and shrill. My dad hates you. He told me you were a grifter. I guess he was right. Sienna, please, Julian begged, reaching for her arm. She recoiled, as if he were infectious. Don't touch me. You dragged me down here, promised me a luxury trip, and now you want me to bail you out. You are pathetic, Julian. Then, she did the thing that truly sealed his fate. She pulled out her phone. She opened Instagram. She hit live. Hey guys, she said to her camera, angling it so Julian was visible in the background, sweating and arguing with the manager. So, update on the Mexico trip. Turns out my boyfriend is actually a fraud who broke and stranded us here. I am literally shaking right now. He lied about everything. #drama, #liar, #stranded. Julian stared at her, horrified. What are you doing? Stop that. I am protecting my brand, Sienna spat. I am not going down with you. She walked away, leaving him standing there alone, the camera capturing his humiliation for her 200,000 followers. She walked straight to the concierge, pulled out a credit card her parents paid for, and booked herself a single ticket home, leaving Julian to rot. Desperation brings out the worst in men, and Julian was no exception. He spent the next hour making phone calls in the lobby, huddled in a corner like a frightened animal. He called his fraternity brothers. He called his golf buddies. He called the venture capitalists who used to invite him to their chalets in Aspen. Hey, Bill, I heard him say on one voicemail that was later forwarded to my lawyer. It is Julian. Listen, slight hiccup with the banking system down here. I need a quick bridge loan, just $20,000. I will wire it back Monday with interest. The response was universal silence. News travels at the speed of light. My press release about the investigation into his embezzlement had hit the wires that morning. The Wall Street Journal had already run a piece online titled, Aura Gen CEO Investigated for Massive Fraud. Stock plummets. No one was going to lend money to a sinking ship. They ghosted him. By 2 p.m, Julian realized he had no options left. He looked down at his wrist. The Rolex Submariner. It was the only thing of value he had left. He found a pawn shop 3 blocks from the resort. It was a dusty, cramped place that smelled of stale tobacco. Julian Thorne, who bought his suits on Savile Row, stood at a scratched glass counter and haggled with a man who did not care about Silicon Valley. It is worth $15,000, Julian pleaded. It is a limited edition. $2,000, the pawnbroker said, not even looking up. Cash. Take it or leave it. Julian took it. He sold his wedding ring, the platinum band I had placed on his finger 15 years ago, for another $300. He walked out of the shop with a wad of pesos and a sense of absolute degradation. He used the money to pay a fraction of the hotel bill, just enough to convince them not to call the Mexican police and to buy a one-way ticket to New York. It was not first class. It was not even business. It was economy. Middle seat, right next to the toilets. The flight was 6 hours of purgatory. Julian sat squeezed between a backpacker and a crying toddler. He could not recline his seat. He was served a bag of pretzels instead of warm nuts. For a man who had not flown commercial in a decade, it was a visceral reminder of how far he had fallen. He spent the entire flight staring at the seat back in front of him, imagining the explanations he would give, the lies he would spin to fix this, but he had no idea what was waiting for him. When the plane landed at JFK, Julian expected to slip away quietly. He thought he could take an Uber to the mansion, shower, and start plotting his counterattack. He was wrong. As he walked out of the customs exit, pushing a luggage cart with a wobbly wheel, a wall of light blinded him. Flashbulbs, dozens of them. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Thorne. A pack of reporters and paparazzi surged forward. I had tipped them off. I had sent an anonymous tip to TMZ and the New York Post with his flight number and arrival time. Is it true you embezzled $3 million? Mr. Thorne, do you have a comment on the foreclosure of your home? Did your mistress leave you in Mexico? Julian recoiled, shielding his eyes with his arm. He looked like a criminal, unshaven, sweaty, wearing wrinkled clothes, pushing a cart. The cameras captured every angle of his defeat. He tried to push through them, shouting, "No comment! Get out of my way!" But they swarmed him like piranhas. He barely made it to a taxi. He threw his bag in and slammed the door, shouting an address to the driver, the address of the Connecticut estate. The ride took an hour. Julian spent it checking his phone, which had finally reconnected to the network. The notifications were endless. "I hate mail," death threats from investors who had lost money, memes of his face superimposed on prison bars. The taxi pulled up to the iron gates of our driveway. Julian got out, expecting to punch in the code and drive up to the sanctuary of his home. He punched the code, error. He punched it again, error. He tried to force the pedestrian gate. It was chained shut. Then he saw it. A bright orange sticker plastered on the call box. Property seized. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He climbed over the fence, tearing his suit pants. He ran up the long driveway, his breath coming in ragged gasps. When he reached the front door, he saw more stickers. The locks had been drilled out and replaced. The windows were dark. The house looked dead. He pounded on the door. "Open up. It is my house. Open the damn door." There was no answer, only the echo of his own fist against the wood. The bank had moved fast. My lawyers had expedited the foreclosure process based on the evidence of fraud, triggering a clause in the mortgage contract that allowed for immediate seizure. He fell to his knees on the welcome mat. He was homeless. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had nowhere to go, but Julian was stubborn. He had one last card to play. The company. He was still the CEO, technically. He could go there, rally the loyalists, and sleep on the couch in his office until he figured this out. He called another taxi. He had to pay with the last of his pawn shop cash. He arrived at the Origin Tower at 10 at night. The building was lit up. A beacon of industry in the dark city. He felt a flicker of hope. This was his kingdom. He walked into the lobby. The night shift security guard was sitting at the desk. It was Mike, the man Julian had walked past 1,000 times without ever learning his name. Julian marched toward the turnstiles, reaching for his badge. "Mr. Thorne," Mike's voice rang out, firm and authoritative. Julian stopped. "Mike, good. Let me in. My badge is malfunctioning." Mike did not move to open the gate. He stood up, slowly. He was a big man, a former Marine. "I cannot do that, sir." "What do you mean you cannot?" Julian snapped. "I am the CEO. Open the gate." "You are not the CEO," Mike said, his face impassive. "I have a memo here from the interim CEO, Mrs. McAllister. You are barred from the premises. Your access is revoked." "Doris," Julian laughed, a frantic, hysterical sound. "Doris is in charge. That is a joke. She is a housewife. Let me in, Mike, or you are fired." "You cannot fire me, sir," Mike said calmly. "But I can arrest you for trespassing if you do not leave." Mrs. McAllister was very clear. No exceptions. Julian stared at the guard. He saw no fear in Mike's eyes, only a cold professionalism. The power dynamic had shifted. Julian was just a man in a dirty suit shouting at a gate he could no longer open. "Fine," Julian screamed, spitting on the floor. "Keep the damn building. I will sue all of you. I will burn this place to the ground." He turned to storm out, but the revolving door was blocked by a short, balding man in a cheap suit, a process server. "Julian Thorne," the man asked. "What now?" Julian roared. The man shoved a thick envelope into Julian's chest. "You have been served. Divorce petition from Doris McAllister, and a civil lawsuit from Origin Dynamics for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and theft. You have 21 days to respond." Julian stood there, clutching the papers. The weight of them felt heavy in his hands. He looked down. The top page was the divorce filing, McAllister versus Thorne. It listed the assets. It listed the grievances. It was a complete accounting of his failures. He walked out of the building. stumbling onto the sidewalk. The city noise was deafening. He had no car. He had no home. He had no job. He had no wife. He had no mistress. He had no money. He looked up at the skyscraper he used to rule. The lights on the 42nd floor were on. My office. He imagined me up there, sitting in his chair, erasing his legacy. He wasn't wrong. Julian sat down on the curb, heedless of the dirt. He put his head in his hands. The adrenaline that had sustained him for the last 2 days finally evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard terror. He was not a genius. He was not a visionary. He was a middle-aged man with a criminal record waiting to happen. A passerby walked past, glancing at him with mild disgust. "Get a job, buddy," the stranger muttered. Julian didn't even look up. He just sat there, clutching the lawsuit to his chest, while the city he thought he owned swallowed him whole. The empire of paper he had built had caught fire, and he was sitting in the ashes. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old mahogany, a scent that usually intimidated people, but to me, it smelled like impending hygiene. This was where the mess of the last 15 years would finally be bleached clean. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded on top of a pristine manila folder. I was wearing a cream-colored suit, tailored to perfection, projecting an image of calm, wealthy stability. Beside me, Reginald Sterling was arranging his pens with the precision of a surgeon preparing his scalpels. He did not look at the defense table. He did not need to. Across the aisle, Julian sat hunched over. He had managed to find a suit, but it fit him poorly. He had lost weight in the 2 weeks since his return from Cabo. His signature silver hair was dull, lacking the expensive salon treatments he could no longer afford. Next to him was his lawyer, a man named Mr. Vance. Vance was not a Wall Street butcher. He was a strip mall attorney, the kind who advertised on the back of bus benches. He was the best Julian could hire with the scraps of money he had managed to beg from a distant cousin. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Mercer entered the room, her black robes billowing. She was a woman known for her low tolerance for theatrics and her high intelligence. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at us. "We are here to hear the matter of McAllister versus Thorne, and the countersuit regarding the control of Origen Dynamics," Judge Mercer said. "Mr. Vance, you may begin your opening statement." Mr. Vance stood up. He tugged at his collar, looking nervous. He knew he was outgunned, but he had to put on a show. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice pitching slightly too high. "This case is a tragedy. It is the story of a vindictive wife, Mrs. Doris McAllister, who has conspired to destroy her husband, a visionary leader. Mr. Thorne built Origen from nothing. He is the face, the heart, and the soul of the company. Mrs. McAllister, in a fit of jealousy over a personal indiscretion, has hijacked the corporate assets, locked my client out of his own building, and engineered a hostile takeover. We are asking the court to reinstate Mr. Thorne as CEO immediately and to dissolve the fraudulent asset freeze she has imposed. This is not justice, Your Honor. This is theft." Julian nodded vigorously, putting on his best wronged genius face. He looked at the judge with wide, pleading eyes, trying to summon the charisma that had once charmed investors out of millions. Judge Mercer looked unimpressed. "Mr. Sterling." Reginald stood up. He did not pace. He did not wave his arms. He simply stood at the podium, resting his hands on the wood. "Your Honor," Reginald said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "Mr. Vance speaks of visionaries and hearts. I prefer to speak of facts, and the fact is, Origen Dynamics is not a company. It is a crime scene," he signaled to the clerk. "I would like to enter Exhibit A into evidence." A document appeared on the screens mounted in front of the judge and the jury box. It was a lease agreement. "This," Reginald continued, "is a 12-month lease for a penthouse apartment in Brooklyn. The tenant is listed as Miss Sienna Miller. The monthly rent is $8,500, but if you look at the bottom of the page, You will see who signed as the guarantor and who paid the security deposit. He zoomed in on the signature, Julian Thorne, CEO, Aura Gen Dynamics. Mr. Thorne used corporate funds specifically, money allocated for research and development to pay for his mistress's apartment, Reginald said flatly. This is not a personal indiscretion. Mr. Vance, this is embezzlement. This is a breach of fiduciary duty. This is stealing from shareholders to pay for an affair. Julian shifted in his seat, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Vance whispered something frantically in his ear, but Julian pushed him away. Objection, Vance shouted. Relevance. This is a divorce matter, not a corporate trial. Overruled, Judge Mercer said sharply. The plaintiff is the company. The misuse of company funds is entirely relevant. Continue. Mr. Sterling? Reginald nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Now, let us move to Exhibit B. The defense claims Mrs. McAllister hijacked a thriving company. They claim Mr. Thorne is the heart of the operation. Reginald pulled out a second document. This one was a spreadsheet, dense with numbers. This is the internal cash flow statement for Aura Gen Dynamics for the last 6 months. As you can see, the company has been insolvent since November of last year. The revenue from the flagship product dropped by 40% due to a manufacturing error Mr. Thorne refused to address. By December, the company did not have enough cash to make payroll. The courtroom went silent. Julian's eyes widened. He had hidden those numbers. He had cooked the books. How did they know if the company was broke? Judge Mercer asked, leaning forward. How did the employees get paid? Reginald turned and pointed a finger at me. Mrs. McAllister paid them, he said softly. He projected a series of bank transfers. On December 15th, Doris McAllister transferred $250,000 from her personal inheritance money left to her by her late father into the Aura Gen payroll account. On January 30th, she transferred another $180,000. She did this anonymously, categorizing it as angel investment to prevent the staff from knowing their CEO had bankrupted the firm. She kept the lights on. She kept the health insurance active for 200 families. Mr. Thorne did not know about this because he was too busy shopping for watches in Cabo San Lucas. I watched Julian. He was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He hadn't known. He had honestly believed his own lies. He thought the money was there because he was a genius. He never realized that I was the one shoveling coal into the engine while he stood on the deck waving at the crowd. She saved you, Vance whispered to Julian, loud enough for me to hear. You idiot! She was paying your bills. I didn't ask her to, Julian hissed back, but the fight was draining out of him. Now, Reginald said, moving in for the kill, let us address the matter of intellectual property. Mr. Vance claims Mrs. McAllister stole the company. I call Mrs. McAllister to the stand to clarify the ownership structure. I stood up and walked to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. I looked at Julian. He looked small. Mrs. McAllister, Reginald asked, who owns the patent for the cellular regeneration sequence that is the basis of Aura Gen's entire product line? I do, I said clearly. It is held by DM Innovations, a separate holding company I established 15 years ago. Why did you separate the patent from the main company? Reginald asked. Why not let Mr. Thorne own it? I took a deep breath. My father was a patent attorney for 40 years. When I married Julian, my father gave me one piece of advice. He said, Doris, love is grand, but business is business. Julian is a salesman. You are a scientist. Let him own the billboard, but you must always own the building. So, on my father's advice, I kept the intellectual property in my name. I licensed it to Aura Gen for $1 a year, revocable at will. And why did you revoke it last week? Because, I said, looking directly at the judge. Julian broke the moral clause of the contract. He used the profits from my invention to defraud investors and abuse his position. I could no longer allow my father's legacy to fund his corruption. "Thank you," Reginald said. "No further questions." Mr. Vance stood up to cross-examine me, but he looked defeated before he even began. "Mrs. McAllister, isn't it true that you planned this, that you waited until he was out of the country to strike?" "Yes," I said. "I did." "So you admit it was a trap?" "It was not a trap. Mr. Vance," I replied calmly, "it was an eviction. When a tenant destroys the property and stops paying rent, the landlord changes the locks. That is what I did." Vance sat down. He had nothing. Judge Mercer took off her glasses. She looked at Julian, her expression cold and final. "The evidence is overwhelming," she stated. "Mr. Thorne, you have treated this company as your personal piggy bank. You have defrauded your shareholders, your wife, and your employees. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Doris McAllister." She banged her gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the quiet room. "The patent rights are confirmed as the sole property of DM Innovations. The asset freeze on Mr. Thorne's personal accounts is upheld and will be used to pay restitution to the company. Furthermore, due to the evidence of embezzlement, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. You are stripped of all titles and shares in Origen Dynamics, effective immediately." It was over. In 10 minutes, 15 years of Julian's ego had been legally dismantled. Julian stood up. He was shaking. His face was purple with rage. The reality of the criminal referral had just hit him. He wasn't just broke. He was going to prison. "You witch!" he screamed, lunging toward the railing. 2 bailiffs stepped forward, blocking him, but he kept shouting, spittle flying from his mouth. "You planned this, you cold-hearted, manipulative witch. How could you do this to me? I am your husband. I made you who you are." The courtroom gasped. Vance tried to pull him down, but Julian shook him off. "You sat there and smiled while I built this empire," Julian roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "And then you cut my throat. You are ice. Doris, you have no heart. You are a monster." I stood up slowly. I did not yell. I did not cry. I walked over to the railing that separated us. I was close enough to smell the fear on him, sour and sharp beneath his cheap cologne. The room went deadly silent. Everyone was waiting for me to scream back. I looked him in the eye. I saw the man I had loved. I saw the man I had protected. And I saw the man who had thrown me away like garbage the moment he thought he found something shinier. "I am not cold, Julian," I said, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "And I am not a monster." "Then why?" he sobbed, his anger collapsing into pathetic self-pity. "Why destroy me?" "I did not destroy you," I said. "You destroyed yourself when you mistook my silence for stupidity. And as for being cold," I leaned in closer, so only he could truly feel the weight of the words. "I am not cold. I just stopped setting myself on fire to keep you warm." I turned my back on him. Behind me, I heard him sob, a broken, jagged sound. The bailiffs moved in to handcuff him not for the civil suit, but because the district attorney's officers had just entered the back of the room. "Mrs. McAllister," Reginald said, offering me his arm. "Shall we go? We have a company to run." "Yes, Reginald," I said, taking his arm. "Let's go." I walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind me, sealing Julian Thorne in the past where he belonged. I stepped out into the hallway, and for the first time in my life, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt like a possibility. The fall of a titan is rarely silent. It is a cacophony of breaking glass, screaming headlines, and the dull thud of bodies hitting the pavement. But the destruction of Julian Thorne was not just loud, it was absolute. It was the kind of total system failure that engineers study for decades to understand how a structure that looked so solid could turn into dust in a matter of weeks. I watched it happen from the 42nd floor of the Origen building, the same office where Julian used to drink 20-year-old scotch and laugh at my budget proposals. Now, the scotch was gone. replaced by my herbal tea, and the laughter had been replaced by the quiet hum of a company finally being run with integrity. But down on the street, and in the court of public opinion, Julian was being eaten alive. The district attorney did not hesitate. Based on the evidence Reginald and I provided, the black ledger, the wire transfers to the shell companies, and the fraudulent tax returns they threw the book at him, the charges were not light: grand larceny, securities fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. It was a laundry list of white-collar sins that carried a maximum sentence of 25 years in a federal penitentiary. Julian was released on bail, but only because his parents, two retired school teachers in Ohio, whom he hadn't visited in 6 years, put up their modest home as collateral. He was confined to the state of New York, stripped of his passport, and forced to wear an ankle monitor that blinked a relentless red light. A constant reminder that he was no longer a free man. But the legal system moves slowly. The court of public opinion moves at the speed of light, and the executioner leading the charge was none other than the breath of fresh air herself. Sienna did not fade away. She pivoted. Realizing that her association with a disgraced fraudster could ruin her influencer career, she decided to monetize her victimhood. She sold her story to a tabloid for $50,000. Then she appeared on a morning talk show, wearing a modest white dress and little makeup, wiping away tears that looked suspiciously rehearsed. I watched the interview in the break room, surrounded by employees who were shaking their heads in disgust. "He was a predator," Sienna sobbed on the high-definition screen. "I was just an intern. I was 24. I didn't know anything about business. Julian told me he was separated. He told me his wife was abusive and mentally unstable. He groomed me. He used his power to manipulate me into going on that trip. I had no idea he was stealing money. I am a victim here, too." It was a masterclass in revisionist history. Sienna, who had demanded first-class flights and diamonds, was now painting herself as a naive child led astray by a wolf. She called him a monster and a narcissist. She described his desperation in Cabo, mocking his inability to pay for dinner, turning his humiliation into a viral meme. Julian watched it too. I know he did. My private investigator reported that Julian spent his days in a rented studio apartment in Queens, a basement unit with water stains on the ceiling and bars on the windows glued to the television. He had to watch the girl he destroyed his marriage to call him a creeping, pathetic old man on national television. The betrayal did not stop with Sienna. The friends who had populated our parties, the venture capitalists who had slapped Julian on the back and drank his wine, suddenly developed collective amnesia. I read an article in the Financial Times where Marcus, a board member who had vacationed with us in the Hamptons for 3 summers, was interviewed. "I never trusted Julian," Marcus was quoted as saying. "There was always something off about him. He was too flashy, too eager. I warned the board years ago to keep an eye on him. It is a tragedy for the company. But frankly, I am not surprised." It was a lie. Marcus had been Julian's biggest cheerleader. But in the world of high finance, loyalty has a shelf life of exactly 1 fiscal quarter. When the stock price tanked, Julian became radioactive. People crossed the street to avoid him. His calls went to voicemail. The exclusive country club where he played golf every Sunday revoked his membership, citing a moral turpitude clause in the bylaws. He was not just broke, he was a pariah. But the blow that truly shattered him was not financial. It was biological. On a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks after the initial hearing, Julian tried to play his last emotional card. He called Emily. Our daughter was back at university, trying to study for her midterms while her father's face was plastered on every newsstand. I had flown out to see her, to explain everything, to show her the evidence so she would understand that I didn't do this out of spite, but out of necessity. She had cried. She had raged. But ultimately, she had understood. She saw the theft. She saw the lies. Julian didn't know this. He thought he could still charm her. He thought he could spin a story about how mommy went crazy and win her over. He called her at 7 in the evening. She didn't answer. He called again at 7:15, sent a voicemail. He called 4 more times in the span of an hour. Finally, he left a voicemail. Emily forwarded it to me later that night. I listened to it in the silence of my new apartment, a glass of wine in my hand. Emily, sweetie. Julian's voice cracked. He sounded drunk, or maybe just exhausted. It is Dad. Please pick up. Don't believe what you are reading. It is a setup. Your mother trapped me. I need you to talk to me. Honey, I am all alone here. I don't have anyone. Please, I am your dad. I love you. It was pathetic. It was the sound of a man who realized that the only thing he had ever actually owned, the love of his child, was gone. Emily never called him back. She blocked his number the next morning. She changed her social media settings to private. She cut the cord with the precision of a surgeon. Julian was not just a criminal to her now. He was a stranger. Desperation breeds delusion. Julian, sitting in his squalid apartment with the radiator hissing and the paint peeling off the walls, convinced himself that he could still win. He convinced himself that if he could just get back into court, if he could just find a loophole, he could sue me for defamation. He could sue me for the value of the patents. He could get it all back. He spent the last of his pawnshop money on legal consultations. He went to 5 different firms in the city. He went to the sharks, the ambulance chasers, the ones who usually took any case for a retainer. He walked into the office of a lawyer named Saul Berkowitz, a man known for fighting dirty. Julian laid out his case. He ranted about how I had tricked him into signing the proxy, how I had manipulated the board. I want to sue her for $50 million, Julian demanded, slamming his fist on Berkowitz's cheap desk. I want my company back. Berkowitz looked at the file. He looked at the name on the opposing counsel's brief. Reginald Sterling. Berkowitz closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. Get out, Berkowitz said. What? Julian blinked. I can pay you. Once we win. You are not going to win, Berkowitz said, lighting a cigarette. You are going up against Reginald Sterling. That man does not lose. And frankly, Mr. Thorne, you are toxic. If I take this case, Sterling will audit my entire practice just for sport. He will find every parking ticket I ever forgot to pay and bury me. No lawyer in this city is going to touch you. You are dead meat. Julian was thrown out of the office. He tried 2 more firms. The answer was the same. The name Sterling was a shield I had bought. And it was impenetrable. Julian was legally quarantined. The reality of his situation finally settled in on a Friday night in late November. The weather had turned bitter, a cold rain sleeting sideways through the canyons of Manhattan. I was working late, finalizing the acquisition of a smaller biotech firm that would stabilize our stock price. My office was warm, lit by the soft glow of a desk lamp. I stood up to stretch and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked down at the street. 42 stories below, the cars were just streaks of red and white light. The people were invisible specks, but one speck was not moving. My security chief, Mike, buzzed me on the intercom. Mrs. McAllister, Mike said. He is here again. Julian, I asked. Yes, ma'am. He is standing across the street, just standing there, looking up. Do you want me to call the police? He is violating the restraining order. I looked down. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was him. I could imagine him perfectly. He would be wearing his old trench coat, the one that was fraying at the cuffs. He would be soaking wet. He would be looking up at the golden light of the office that used to be his. The office where he had felt like a god. No, Mike, I said softly. Let him look. He cannot get in. I stood there for a long time, watching him watch me. I wondered what he was thinking. Down on the pavement, the rain was soaking through Julian's shoes. He shivered violently. He looked up at the Origin Tower, a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the night sky. He saw the light in the corner office. He knew I was there. He knew I was warm. He knew I was powerful. For the first time in his life, the fog of his narcissism cleared, and he saw the truth with brutal clarity. He had spent 15 years chasing the shiny things. He had chased the media interviews, the applause, the young women with vacuous eyes, the fast cars, the expensive watches. He had treated me like a utility, something boring and functional, like a generator or a foundation. He had looked at Sienna, a piece of polished glass, and thought she was a diamond. He had looked at me, a diamond in the rough, unpolished but indestructible, and thought I was a pebble. Now, the glass had shattered in his hands, cutting him to the bone, and the diamond was up there in the sky, unreachable, shining with a cold, hard light that he could no longer touch. He had traded a partner who would have walked through fire for him, for a girl who wouldn't even walk through a hotel lobby for him. "I had it all," he whispered to the rain. The words were snatched away by the wind. "I had it all, and I threw it away." He stood there for another 10 minutes, until the cold became unbearable. Then, he turned around. He walked toward the subway station, his shoulders hunched, disappearing into the dark, wet mouth of the city. I watched him go. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a deep, resonant closure. The scales were balanced. The bill had been paid. I turned away from the window and went back to my desk. I had work to do. The company was growing, and for the first time in a decade, the foundation was solid. Julian Thorne was just a ghost now, a cautionary tale I would tell my daughter one day. But for him, the nightmare was just beginning. The trial was next week, and prison, unlike his marriage, was something he could not charm his way out of. The winter that year was harsh, but inside the walls of what used to be Aura-Gen Dynamics, it felt like the first day of spring. I remember standing in the lobby on a Tuesday morning in late January. The maintenance crew was there, 2 men in blue overalls standing on ladders, carefully unscrewing the giant chrome letters that spelled out my husband's ego. The A and the G came down with a heavy clank, leaving behind faint, ghostly outlines on the marble wall. I did not feel a pang of nostalgia. I felt like I was watching a tumor being surgically removed. By noon, the new signage was up, Phoenix Biotech. I had chosen the name not for its mythological grandeur, but for its accuracy. We had burned to the ground. We had been reduced to ash by greed and negligence, and now we were rising. The logo was simple, a stylized flame in a deep, clinical blue. It was not flashy. It did not scream, "Look at me." It whispered, "Trust me." The culture shift was palpable. Under Julian's reign, the office had been a place of hushed whispers and terrified glances. People walked quickly, eyes down, terrified of being called into the glass office for a dressing down. Now, the doors were open. I had ordered the removal of the frosted glass partitions that separated the executive suite from the bullpen. I wanted to see my team, and I wanted them to see me. I walked through the research department that afternoon. Dr. Aris Thorne. No relation to Julian, thankfully, our head of cellular biology, looked up from his microscope. He was a brilliant man who had been threatening to resign for 2 years because Julian kept cutting his budget to pay for marketing galas. "Dr. Aris," I said, stopping by his station. He flinched slightly, a reflex from the old regime. "Mrs. McAllister. Miss McAllister. I was just—" "Relax, Aris," I said, smiling. "I am not here to yell about timelines. I just wanted to let you know that the board approved your request for the new sequencer. It will be here on Monday." He blinked, stunned. "The Gene X 5000. That is a $200,000 machine. Doris, Julian said we couldn't afford the shipping, let alone the hardware." "Julian was buying jewelry with our capital," I said simply. "We are a science company again. Aris, we buy science. You get what you need to do the work. Just promise me you will get the stability tests done by March." "I will get them done by February," he said, a genuine grin spreading across his face. It was moments like that, seeing the fear evaporate from the eyes of people who had given me their loyalty when they had no reason to, that made the long nights of restructuring worth it. I promoted Mrs. Gable, the assistant Julian had called a relic, to office manager. She knew more about the operational flow of the building than anyone else. I gave her a 15% raise and a corner office. When I told her, she cried. She told me she had been worried about losing her pension. I told her that as long as I was breathing, her future was secure. But the most profound change was not in the office. It was in my relationship with my daughter. Emily came home for spring break. In the past, her visits had been fraught with tension. She would come home, lock herself in her room to avoid Julian, and leave as soon as possible. I would spend the entire time playing peacekeeper, trying to buffer the toxicity. This time, I picked her up at the airport in my own car, a sensible, luxury sedan that I had bought with my own money. We didn't go back to the cold, echoing mansion in Connecticut. That house was gone, sold to a developer who planned to tear it down, which felt fitting. Instead, we drove out to the North Fork of Long Island. I bought a house. It was not a palace. It was a cedar shingle cottage sitting on a bluff overlooking the Sound. It had a wraparound porch, a garden that was currently sleeping under a layer of frost, and a kitchen that smelled of sage and roasting chicken. It was a home. It was my home. Emily walked in, dropping her bags in the hallway. She looked around at the warm wood floors, the bookshelves filled with novels instead of business trophies, and the fire crackling in the stone hearth. "Mom," she said, turning to me, "this place breathes." "It does," I said, hanging up my coat. "Do you like it?" "I love it," she said. She walked over and hugged me. It wasn't the polite hug of a daughter fulfilling an obligation. It was a fierce, tight embrace. "I am so proud of you. Mom, I mean it. The way you handled everything, the lawsuit, the company. You are literally a legend on my campus. My women's studies professor used your hostile takeover as a case study in agency and reclamation." I laughed, pouring us both a glass of wine. "I am a case study that sounds exhausting." "It is empowering," Emily insisted, sitting on the sofa and tucking her legs under her. "You didn't just leave him. You outsmarted him. You took back what was yours. You have no idea how cool that is. I used to think—" She hesitated, looking down at her glass. "You used to think I was weak." I finished for her, sitting down opposite her. "I used to think you were trapped," she corrected. "I thought you were just going to fade away in that big cold house, but you were just waiting. You were a sleeper agent in your own marriage." "I did what I had to do to survive, Emily," I said softly, "but I am done surviving. I am ready to live." We spent the weekend talking, really talking. We talked about her classes, her boyfriend, and her fears about the future. We talked about Julian, too. But not with anger. We spoke of him like a storm that had passed, leaving some wreckage but clearing the air. Emily was no longer a child I had to protect. She was a young woman I could respect, and she respected me back. That mutual admiration was worth more to me than the entire valuation of Phoenix Biotech. A few weeks later, I had dinner with Reginald Sterling. It was not a date. At least, we didn't call it that. It was a debriefing at a small, dimly lit French bistro in the West Village. Reginald was not the kind of man who brought flowers or made grand romantic gestures. He was a man of precision and intellect, and that was exactly what I needed. He was wearing a charcoal suit, as always, but his tie was loosened slightly, a concession to the evening hour. We had finished discussing the final settlement details with the SEC regarding Julian's fraud. The company was in the clear. "You have done remarkable work, Doris," Reginald said, cutting his steak with methodical care. "Most interim CEOs would have folded under the pressure of the rebranding. You managed to retain 90% of the client base." "I just told them the truth," I said, taking a sip of Bordeaux. "Investors are tired of visionaries. They want competence. I sold them competence." Reginald looked at me. His eyes were gray and sharp, but there was a warmth in them that hadn't been there when we first met in his office. "You sold them integrity. It is a rare commodity these days." He reached across the table and refilled my glass. It was a small gesture, but it felt intimate. "So," he said, "the war is over. The castle is secure. What does the Queen do now?" "The Queen takes a vacation," I said, smiling. "I am thinking of Italy, Tuscany, somewhere with good wine and no Wi-Fi." "Tuscany is lovely in October," Reginald noted. "I have a small villa near Siena. It has been empty for years. If you need recommendations for vineyards, or if you need a guide who speaks the language." He let the sentence hang there, suspended in the candlelight. He wasn't pushing. He was offering. He was opening a door, very gently, to see if I wanted to walk through it. I looked at him, this man who had been my sword and my shield for the last 6 months. He was 20 years older than Julian had been when we met. But he had a vitality, a gravitas that Julian never possessed. Julian had been a boy playing at being a man. Reginald was a man who had nothing left to prove. "I might take you up on that, Reginald," I said softly. "I might need a guide." We didn't hold hands. We didn't kiss. But as we walked out of the restaurant into the crisp New York night, we walked in step with each other. It was a partnership. It was a friendship that had been forged in the fire of a legal battle. And now, it was cooling into something solid and durable. I didn't know if I would ever marry again. I had had enough of vows, but the idea of a companion, someone who saw me as an equal, was no longer terrifying. It was inviting. The final ghost of my past arrived on a Thursday, delivered in a stark white envelope with the stamp of the Federal Detention Center. I was at the beach house. It was raining outside, a gentle, rhythmic drumming on the roof. I was sitting by the fire, reading a book, when I saw the letter on the side table where I had tossed the mail earlier. I knew who it was from before I looked at the return address. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. Inmate number 784-221, Julian Thorne. I stared at it for a long time. 6 months ago, seeing his handwriting would have made my heart race. It would have triggered a cocktail of fear and guilt. Now I felt nothing. My pulse remained steady. My hands were dry. I picked up the letter opener, a heavy silver tool that felt substantial in my hand, and sliced the envelope open. I unfolded the cheap, yellow-lined paper. Doris. I don't know why I am writing this. Maybe because I have nothing else to do. I am sitting in a cell that is smaller than our old walk-in closet. The food is inedible. The people here are animals. I have had a lot of time to think. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But was it really necessary to go this far, to take everything? I am 50 years old. Doris, I have nothing, no money, no name, no future. I dream about the house sometimes. I dream about the way you used to make coffee in the mornings. I took it for granted. I know that now. Is there any chance at all that you could help me with the appeal? Just a character reference. Something to get the sentence reduced. I am begging you. I am still the man you married. Somewhere inside, I am still him. Love. Julian. I read it twice. He was still bargaining. He was still trying to manipulate me. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for where he was. He missed the coffee, not the woman who made it. He missed the house, not the home. I am still the man you married, he wrote. That was the problem. He was exactly the man I married. He hadn't changed. But I didn't feel angry. Anger requires energy. Anger implies that the person still has power over you. I just felt a profound, quiet indifference. He was a stranger who had once lived in my house. He was a bad investment I had finally written off. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. The logs were burning bright and hot, casting dancing shadows on the room I had bought with my own intelligence and my own courage. I held the letter over the flames. I didn't say a dramatic goodbye. I didn't curse him. I simply let go. The paper caught instantly. The yellow edges turned brown, then black, then curled into glowing orange ash. I watched the words, "Love Julian," disappear into smoke. It took less than 10 seconds for the letter to vanish completely. I watched the smoke rise up the chimney, carrying the last of his influence out into the wet, dark night. I dusted off my hands. I walked back to my chair, picked up my book, and turned the page. The fire was warm. The house was quiet. My daughter was safe. My company was thriving. And tomorrow, the sun would rise over the ocean, illuminating a world that belonged entirely to me. I was not just Doris McAllister, the scorned wife. I was Doris McAllister, the CEO, the mother, the survivor, the victor. I took a sip of my tea. It tasted like cinnamon and peace, and for the first time in 20 years, I was truly, completely free. The Federal Detention Center was a gray scar on the landscape of upstate New York. A brutalist block of concrete surrounded by razor wire that sliced through the heavy winter sky. It was raining. A cold, relentless drizzle that turned the prison yard into a slick of mud. But inside the visitors' room, the air was bone dry and smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. I sat on a metal stool bolted to the floor, my hands resting on the cold stainless steel table. I was wearing a trench coat made of soft cashmere, a stark contrast to the hard edges of this place. Across from me, separated by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass, sat inmate number 784-221. Julian Thorne looked older than his 45 years. The prison barber had shaved his silver hair down to a stubble, exposing the vulnerability of his scalp. His skin, once tanned from weekends in the Hamptons and business trips to Cabo, was now the color of old parchment. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame, stripping him of the last vestiges of his executive identity. He picked up the phone receiver on his side of the glass. His hand trembled slightly. I picked up mine. "You came," he said, his voice sounding tinny and distorted through the line. "I did," I replied. "Today is sentencing. 10 years. Julian, I thought it was appropriate to say goodbye properly." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for some sign of the woman he used to bully, the woman he used to ignore. He didn't find her. 10 years, he repeated, looking down at his hands. "I will be 55 when I get out. I will be an old man with nothing." "You will be alive," I said. "That is more than you can say for the company you tried to kill." He flinched. The mention of the company still stung. "Phoenix Biotech," he muttered. "I saw the news in the common room. The stock is up 30%. You are the darling of Wall Street now. The Iron Widow, they call you." "Better than the bankrupt fraudster," I said, my voice even. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Then, his expression changed. The pity and self-loathing vanished for a second, replaced by a genuine, burning curiosity. It was the question that had been eating him alive for the last 3 months of his confinement. "Doris," he said, pressing his forehead against the glass. "I have played it over and over in my head, every night, the timing, the documents, the way you moved. You were too fast. You had the forensic accountants ready. You had the lawyers briefed. You had the assets liquidated before I even boarded the plane." He paused, swallowing hard. "You must have hated me for a long time," he whispered. "You must have been planning this for years. You were just waiting for me to slip up, weren't you? You stopped loving me a long time ago, didn't you?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had shared my bed, who had fathered my child, and who had ultimately underestimated me in every conceivable way. He needed to believe that I was a monster. It was easier for him to accept his fate if he could paint me as a calculating villain who had never really loved him. It absolved him of the guilt of betraying a good woman. "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked softly. "That I was a spider waiting on the web?" "It is the only thing that makes sense," he insisted. "No one moves that fast unless they are already out the door." I reached into my purse. The guard in the corner took a step forward, but I moved slowly, deliberately. I pulled out a small rectangular piece of paper. It was not a legal document. It was not a subpoena. It was a personal check, or rather, a voided one. I pressed it against the glass so he could see it. Julian squinted. He read the date. It was dated exactly 1 day before he had asked for a divorce. one day before he left for Cabo. Then he read the amount, $5 million. And finally, he read the payee line, Origin Dynamics. He looked up, confused. What is this? My father left me a secret inheritance, I said, my voice low and steady. He knew you were reckless with money, so he put it in a trust that I could only access in case of a dire emergency. I knew the company was in trouble. Julian, I knew you were drowning in debt. I didn't know about the embezzlement, not specifically. I just knew you were desperate. I watched the realization begin to dawn on him, a slow, horrifying sunrise. I liquidated the trust that morning, I continued. I wrote this check. I was going to give it to you that night at dinner. I was going to tell you that I loved you, that we were a team, and that I was here to bail you out. I was going to save you. Julian, I was going to pay off the debts, stabilize the company, and give you a fresh start. I was ready to bet my entire future on us. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at the check, the $5 million that would have covered every cent he stole, every debt he owed, and left him a free man. But you didn't come to dinner, I said. You came home and asked for a divorce. You told me I was old. You told me I was useless. You threatened to take our daughter and leave me with nothing. I pulled the check back and tore it in half, then in half again. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the small booth. I didn't prepare to destroy you because I hated you, I said, leaning in close. I prepared to save you because I loved you. I had the lawyers on speed dial not to sue you, but to protect us from creditors. I had the accountants ready to restructure the debt, not to audit it. Tears began to stream down Julian's face. Not the fake tears for the cameras, but real, ugly tears of a man realizing the magnitude of his mistake. I could have been free, he choked out. You could have been a hero, I said. If you had just come to me with the truth, if you had just trusted your wife instead of your ego. But you didn't. You chose Sienna. You chose the lie. I stood up. The metal stool scraped against the floor. You didn't lose because I was cruel. Julian, I said, delivering the final blow that would haunt him for every night of his 10-year sentence. You didn't lose because I was a mastermind. You lost because you dropped the only life raft right before the storm hit. You drowned yourself. Doris, wait, he shouted, slamming his hand against the glass. Please don't go. I am sorry I didn't know. Goodbye, Julian. I said, try to make the best of the time. Read some books. Maybe you will finally learn something. I hung up the receiver. I didn't look back at him. I walked to the heavy steel door, buzzed the guard, and waited. The lock disengaged with a loud, metallic clank, the sound of finality. I stepped out of the visiting room and walked down the long linoleum corridor. I could still hear his muffled shouts behind the glass, but they were fading, becoming just another echo in a building full of regrets. I pushed open the heavy exterior doors and stepped out into the prison parking lot. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of brilliant, crisp blue sky. The air smelled of wet asphalt and pine needles, the scent of the world washing itself clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, sharp oxygen of freedom. My chest felt light. The burden of the last year, the weight of the anger and the sadness, had lifted. I had said what needed to be said. I had closed the book. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts list and scrolled down to Julian Thorne. I didn't hesitate. I pressed delete contact, then I pressed block number. He was gone. He was part of history now. A chapter titled Lessons Learned. A notification chimed softly. A new message. I looked at the screen. It was from Reginald Sterling. The merger papers for the European expansion are on your desk. Also, I found a vineyard in Tuscany that is for sale. The owner says the harvest this year is exceptional. Partners are waiting. A smile touched my lips, not the triumphant smile of a victor, but the quiet, contented smile of a woman who knows exactly who she is and where she is going. On my way, I typed back. I walked toward my car. a sleek black sedan waiting for me with the engine purring. My driver opened the door. "Where to, Ms. McAllister?" he asked. "Forward," I said. "Just drive forward." I slid into the leather seat, and as the car pulled away from the prison, leaving the gray walls and the man behind them in the rearview mirror, I didn't look back. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I was in the driver's seat. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately, reclaiming one's power. I hope my story reminds you that sometimes, the person you think is your safety net is actually the one holding the scissors, but also that you are stronger than you know. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when the odds were stacked against you? Let's share our stories and support each other. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach and inspire even more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay strong, and never let anyone dim your light.